making a ferrule for a birdcage awl. This is WB Fine Woodworking with Don Bullock. Hi there and welcome to WB Fine Woodworking. I'm Don. When Rob over at Make Things made his challenge on his YouTube channel for his viewers to make a stubby awl, I went ahead and accepted the challenge and made this birdcage awl. Since in the past I'd only used ferrules like this one for a Wood River ice cream scoop that's made out of stainless steel, I had to come up with some ideas of ferrules for an awl. I thought a ferrule on an awl was very important. In this video, I'm going to show you how I took a hexagon compression nut and turned it into a round ferrule for my awl. I'll also mention that you could use things like copper tubing that I used on this scratch awl that I made. Ferrule. A ring or cap, typically a metal one, which strengthens the end of a handle, stick, or tube and prevents it from splitting or wearing. For the ferrule on my birdcage awl, I used one of these brass compression nuts. This is the side view, and this is the back side view. Yes, it has threads inside, and that's going to come into play later on in this video. The first step of using any ferrule and turning down to the right size is to get an accurate measurement of the inside diameter. Since there are threads inside, I'll add a little bit to this dimension when I turn the piece. Once I have the dimensions for the inside of the ferrule and also the length of the ferrule, I can start turning down the end of the blank that the ferrule is going to go on. As you'll see, this takes quite a bit of time and requires a lot of accuracy. I'll explain that further when the time comes. Of course, some of you may be looking at this piece and saying, Don, sharpen your chisel and tighten up the tailstock. And I did right after this. Now let's speed up this process to quadruple speed. Now, according to my calipers and double checking with the nut, I'm down to approximately the right size that I need on this short piece here. Now I need to move that diameter back to the full length of the ferrule. This is going to take quite a bit more effort and turning and double checking as I go. Turning down to the right diameter for the ferrule is critical. You can always take more wood off, but it's impossible to put it back. And glue won't hold if you make it too small. This is just one of many times that I use my calipers to double check to see where I was on this process. I also used the nut itself to double check my work. From what I could tell, I wasn't back quite far enough, and so I decided to go back a little further on my depth for the ferrule length. Let's speed the process up again. And even speed it up more with the time warp. Yes, this whole process is very tedious. It's probably the most important part of making the awl. You may notice here that I have two diameters. One will fit the threads and the smaller one will fit into the hole that's at the other end of the compression nut. Now here's where I'm making a mistake. I wasn't quite sure about the ferrule's length, so I took off too much. And I'm going to have to show you what that looks like later on. I also gouged out a groove in that extra space. I mixed up some 5-minute epoxy to glue the ferrule onto the blank. This little bowl I'm using is made of silicone. My silicone brush came in handy for putting the glue onto the end of the blank so that I could put the ferrule on. The pad underneath is silicone, and so is the brush holder in the background. To find out more, check out my video, Glue and Silicone Don't Mix. After I got enough glue on, I put the ferrule on and twisted it. Then I used the wrench to make sure that I was all the way down and tight onto that piece of wood. If my turn diameter had been as accurate as I wanted it to be, the wrench would have been necessary because the ferrule would be actually cutting threads into the wood. I turned the blank a little too small to do that, but the glue will still hold. For the next step in this ferrule process, I'm going to be using these files. They're among the few tools that I have left over from my dad's workshop. I remember using them as a kid. The files are necessary for turning down that hex shape on the nut so it's round. Here I'm using the edge of one of the files because it's the most aggressive cut of all of the file edges that I have available to me. Again, we'll speed up the process to save some time. Once I got the ferrule down to this point, I decided to use the flat edge of my most aggressive file. It did a pretty good job of taking it down even farther. Eventually the ferrule did become round, so I could go to a less aggressive file and start polishing. After filing, I switched over to my AberNet sanding mesh and started at 220. It's getting there. It's looking very polished. It's looking very nice. I moved through the grits all the way up to 600 before I finished off the polishing. You might want to check out my video on the Mirka AberNet mesh for turning on a lathe. It works really great. I'll stop the lathe and zoom in here so you can see how well polished and smooth this ferrule got. As you can clearly see, the hexagon's all gone. The files and sandpaper did their job. Now I had that ferrule all smooth and shiny. It looked outstanding. But this happened. I turned the handle around and chucked up the ferrule so that I could turn the rest of the handle. Obviously, something went desperately wrong and the handle went flying off the lathe. Now I can't tell you what I said or did at the time. I don't think you really want to know. Nor did I take pictures of what the ferrule looked like. I just wasn't in the mood. Suffice it to say, it was a mess with a lot of dents. This is as close to a photo as I have, as I desperately chucked up the handle as best I could to see if I could salvage the ferrule. This is the only video that I got of fixing the ferrule. Perhaps if I freeze this frame here and zoom in, you'll be able to see what I was talking about. Here's one of the dents. So I'm working hard to smooth out all of these dents that are in the ferrule. I was concentrating so much on getting all the dents out and making it look shiny again that I just didn't care about getting the video. But you may have noticed on the finished ferrule that there's some lines that go through the ferrule. Those lines were actually caused by the thread that's in the inside of the ferrule. Yes, I filed so hard that I went through to the threads. Unfortunately, I had to go that deep, but that's just the way it turned out. At the end of the ferrule, you can see where I made my mistake, thinking the ferrule was wider than it was. I'll show you what I did to fix that in another video. While these were mistakes in making the awl, they certainly don't affect the use of the awl. One of these compression nuts worked out really well for the ferrule on this awl. I'm really glad that I used it. Here are some other possibilities for ferrules for an awl. This first example of a ferrule is made from stainless steel. It came with an ice cream scoop kit. I've also used copper tubing for ferrules, including this one on an awl blank that I'm planning to turn. And here's a copper tubing ferrule on a scratch awl that I made recently. It's made from myrtle wood and bacote. For those of you not familiar with myrtle wood, it's a native of Oregon. Here's a couple more photos of this awl. This one's a little more tricky to use. It's a 1/4 inch short flare nut. This is a view of the tapered end, and here's one on the end of an awl blank. I plan to do another video on how I did this one. The video will include the problems I have and a real easy fix. I'm still perfecting my technique of using one of these flare nuts for a ferrule. I have come up with a smooth move, and I'll have a video on what I did to solve the problems of using one of these, because I think they look really great as ferrules. Now, if you'd like to get started on an awl, copper tubing is probably the easiest thing to use for a ferrule. You have another video over here to watch in this series, and if you click on my logo over here, you can subscribe to the channel. Thank you all very much for watching.